Hey guys, tonight we slip through an iron gate into a courtyard bathed in silver moonlight where the cold stone walls seem to whisper your fate, and you probably won't survive this gig without feeling queasy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the moonlit executioner's courtyard for your first grim assignment, every footstep echoing on slick cobblestones. A damp mist clings to your cloak, and the scent of wood smoke mingles with something darker, stale blood and rotting straw. Lanterns flicker in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that dance like restless spirits. Your heart thumps as you grip the rough-hewn beam of your axe, handle its weight, a promise of duty and dread. In medieval Europe, executioners were official municipal employees paid by town councils, an ironic salary for slaughter that townsfolk grudgingly funded. Yet no ledger entry could tally the shame that accompanied the job. Social stigma clung to your very name, a name whispered with disgust by market vendors, hushed by children, and scrawled with scorn in church records. You're told to keep your head low and your gaze lower, because the commoners fear contamination, fear that one slip of executioner grime could taint their souls. As you step toward a shackled prisoner, your boots splash in a shallow puddle, and you catch your reflection in a rain-polished blade, pale face-haunted eyes, and that ridiculous brimmed hat meant to ward off curses. Fringe rumor has it executioners once bored holes through their own hats at dawn to let bad spirits escape talk about a self-inflicted headache. You can almost hear your future self griping about that hat's ridiculous silhouette at family dinners long before you even have one. The prisoner's shackles scrape like rusty chainsaw blades in the hush, a sound that jolts your ears even in a place built for horrors. Candlelight warms the damp walls enough to reveal grisly carvings, crude sketches of past executions, each more gruesome than the last. Your first assignment, a thief branded for larceny, condemned to the block for stealing from a nobleman's pantry. You swallow hard, recalling the bite in your throat when you first learned the axe meant instant death. But if you're off by a hair, your reputation and the whole town's laundry routine goes awry. You size up the block, a heavy oak stump scarred with centuries of cuts. A small groove is carved where heads rest angled just so. Bloody droplets from earlier jobs have etched a permanent ring around its base. They say some executioners use those droplets to brew a blood ink for signing death warrants. Historians still argue whether that's apocryphal or a candid act of revenge against the court scribes. Either way, it's the kind of eerie detail that seeps under your skin as surely as the courtyard's chill. Your hands tremble as you adjust the axe blade, testing its sharpness against a small wooden peg. The steel rings hollow a clean note that promises swift deliverance or a gruesome botch if your aim falters. One mainstream fact, the medieval axe was often custom forged by blacksmiths who specialized in weapons of execution. These blades were tempered for strength and balance rather than battlefield agility. Yet no amount of craftsmanship eases the weight in your belly as you raise the axe above your head. In the hush, a distant owl hoots its call, a mocking reminder of your nightly rounds. The courtyard gate squeaks shut behind you, sealing you off from any hope of retreat. You steel yourself with a mental shrug. All right, let's get this over with. A nervous chuckle escapes your lips, probably the third attempt at humor after realizing laughter might keep you from hyperventilating. 3 jokes in, and you're only halfway to calming down. You recall an old superstition: some executioners carried a rabbit's foot in a pouch to ward off misfortune. Weirdly comforting, though. Most of the time it just bounced around, adding to your already cluttered pockets. That tiny talisman hardly compares to burying silver coins under your chopping block. A ritual meant to pay the ferryman should your own soul need crossing. Fringe rituals like these might seem absurd, but you cling to any totem that offers a sliver of certainty in a business ruled by sharp edges and sharp judgments. Suddenly, you realize the condemned looks up at you, eyes wide, voice cracking. Have mercy, please. Mercy doesn't live here. You set your jaw, stepping forward under the cold gaze of moonbeams. The prisoner's head quivers on the block breath coming in ragged spurts. You line up the axe's pole with precise care, recalling that a clean beheading requires instant accuracy just behind the ear. A single swing, one false move, and you'll be the subject of the next grim sketch on those damp walls. Your knuckles turn white as you grasp the axe's haft. You inhale, tasting iron in your mouth, and raise the blade in that silent ballet of blade and bone. A gust of wind stirs the lantern flames, and you brace, then heave. Steel meets flesh in one fluid slash. A gout of crimson blooms like a terrible rose, and the head bounces onto the straw with a muffled thud. For a heartbeat, the courtyard is suspended in shock. Then the familiar stir of startled crows takes over. You step back, wiping the axe on a ragged cloth. No applause, only the scurrying of rats from the shadows. The prisoner's body lies still, a cautionary tale for thieves and tyrants alike. You feel a twisted surge of relief, first job over reputation intact. Yet the courtyard feels colder now, as if drained by that single swing. You tuck the axe away and turn toward the exit footsteps, lighter, but heart strangely heavier. Tonight, you learned why the role provoked fear and disgust across medieval Europe, not just for the blood, but for the weight of carrying death itself. You are both instrument and outcast, bound to a duty too grim for any normal soul. As you slip into the night, that moonlit courtyard recedes behind you, but its shadows cling to your thoughts. Here, where the line between justice and cruelty blurs, you stand forever in the echoes of a blade's hymn. You step into the narrow, damp corridor, adjoining the executioner's courtyard, where the cold stone walls weep moisture, and every inhalation feels like you're sucking in a soggy sponge. A pungent cocktail of bleach, used in those rare moments of cleaning, mingles with the reek of stale blood and the sour tang of rotting straw. Your nostrils flare as you recall that bleach wasn't the scented household staple you know today. You're breathing live fumes strong enough to peel paint off a barn door. A drip echoes somewhere above you like a metronome set to the rhythm of dread. Each drop splashes into shallow puddles streaked with rusty pigment, leftover blood, oxidized into reddish-brown sludge. You can almost taste the copper on your tongue. A rat scurries past, pinning you in place, until you realize it's not mid-air, but splashing through the same liquid gore. You give it a sarcastic nod because, sure, it's the small victories that make your morning. Mainstream fact medieval urban centers often lacked basic sanitation, and few towns had any real sewer system until the 13th century. People dumped waste into streets or cesspits, which leached into water sources and fueled plagues. You shudder as you remember hauling buckets of wastewater out of the pit behind your quarters, only to have the smell waft back through those ancient stones. Fringe whisper, some executioners supposedly scattered crushed seashells on the floor to absorb foul spirits, and maybe to cut down on slipping. You've tried it once. The shells just shattered under your boots and left you with a concerto of crunching underfoot. You steel yourself against the sensory onslaught, the musty musk of mold thriving in damp crevices, the acrid zing of disinfecting vinegar-soaked rags, and the distant croak of frogs from a nutrient-rich moat. That moat, historians still argue whether it was truly designed to ward off invaders or simply to corral runoff from the slaughterhouse upriver either way. It's now an algae-green soup, redolent of decay. You cough lightly, thinking you smell something resembling burnt toast. Nope, just another corpse left to stew overnight. Every bruise of color on these walls tells a story, dark smudges where a prisoner's face pressed against the stones, streaks where rainwater rolled through dried clots, and shadowy handprints layered like a grotesque fresco. A single candle guttering in a rusted iron holder casts wavering shapes, and for a moment you swear they're dancing until the flame sputters, reminding you that nothing here thrives without decay. You brush past a wooden rack where cleavers hang once bright and polished, now dulled by years of severing flesh. You pause at a narrow alcove where fresh straw has been laid out for the day's work. It's intended to absorb blood, but you wonder if it does anything besides feel like damp toast crumbs under your boots. Joking to yourself, you imagine offering this as a medieval spa treatment. Come experience our deluxe spa, open to public executions. 3 light jokes in, and you're still not sure if you're caffeinated enough to keep your eyes open. As you kneel to sweep the worst of the debris into a bucket, your elbow brushes a cold iron ring embedded in the floor, an old ankle shackle point relic of a botched prison break 2 decades ago. Local legend holds that the ghost of that escapee still rattles the bars at midnight, begging you to let him out. You half expect a spectral voice whispering, "Trust, free me," but get only your own breath echoing back. Some say executioners kept a pet cat to soothe restless spirits. Now you see why cats aren't easily spooked by rattling chains or tinted puddles. Your cloak, heavy and soaked at the hem, sticks to the stones like a damp shadow. You brush it off, sending droplets pattering against the wall, a sound so crisp it feels like a whispered warning. The chill seeps through your jerkin, a souvenir from your first winter on the job. Jokes aside, folks back home thought you traded your warm hearth for the Arctic Circle. You can't blame them. Half the year, it feels that way in these passages. You pause to rinse your hands in a basin carved from limestone, its edges worn smooth by centuries of scrubbing. The water is cold, tinged with sediment, tiny black flecks that swirl at the bottom like microscopic shadows. With every rub of the cloth you dislodge specks of gray muck, and more disturbingly, flecks of dark red residue that refuse to wash away. Fringe rumor says executioners once used animal brains mixed with oil to polish blades to a wicked shine. You wonder if those same brains ended up splattered on these walls. Standing, you catch sight of your reflection in a tarnished copper plate nailed to the wall, a hand-me-down from the previous executioner. The glass is too warped for a clear look, but you see a gaunt face framed by that cursed brimmed hat, whose holes you bored at dawn. The hat, that legend says, was supposed to let bad spirits escape, though it mostly just makes you look like a flying saucer fallen into despair. You push it back and half laugh at yourself, the executioner's fashion icon nobody asked for. You move on to the chamber beyond where the morning's work begins. Light filters through narrow slits in the stone, illuminating motes that dance like midges in the stale air. Here you'll ready your tools, axes, swords, and the dreaded breaking wheel for the day's punishments. But first breath. You inhale deeply, and the earthy funk slaps you awake better than any mug of ale. Mainstream fact medieval execution tools were often kept in the town armory or blacksmith's forge and lent out for each job rather than owned outright. Yet, as the appointed executioner, you keep them close, lest they walk off with a drunken guard. You lay each instrument on a rough plank table, its surface scarred by centuries of cuts. The axe's blade gleams faintly. The sword's edge bears tiny nicks where it nicked bone one rainy night too many. You run your thumb along the spine, feeling the slight imperfection, a reminder that no edge stays perfect under repeated use. Fringe belief holds that executioners sometimes coated their blades with iron gall ink to mark their tools as property of the crown. You've never tried it, mostly because ink smudges are a nightmare on your leather gloves. As you finish inspecting the tools, you sense the corridor's hush, deepen an oppressive quiet that precedes the opening of the courtyard gates. You pause to straighten your jerkin, adjust the pouch, holding your rabbit's foot, and flex your fingers. Some days you swear that tiny talisman feels heavier than the axe. Historians still argue whether such charms actually offered protection or served as a psychological crutch for those too squeamish for the slaughterhouse. You, for one, would pay good coin for a talisman that neutralize the stench of lye and blood. You take a final lengthwise glance at the corridor, its damp stones, its poison-soaked air, its chorus of drips and skitters. This sensory gauntlet is your morning coffee, your wake-up call, louder than any rooster crow. You crack a tired grin and step forward toward the daylight spilling through the courtyard gates. Outside awaits another chorus of gawking villagers, more straw to sweep, more walls to scrub, and another day's worth of bone-chilling smells to shoulder. After all, if you can survive this, the rest of your duties might feel like a spa day minus the spa and mostly day. You step into the tool chamber just beyond the courtyard gates, where a rough-hewn plank table groans under the weight of steel and iron. A single lantern swings overhead, casting elongated reflections on blades that gleam like quiet threats. Your gloved fingers twitch as you brush a thin layer of oil from a broad axe head, its surface cold enough to bite. Each instrument lies in solemn order, axe, sword, breaking, wheel components, and the lesser-known garrote wire coiled on a wooden peg. The air tastes faintly of machine oil and earth and dust, a scent you've come to associate with that moment right before duty begins. The first tool demands respect: your executioner's axe. Its double-faced blade was once custom forged by master smiths who understood that an axe meant for justice needed balance over brute sharpness. You heft it feeling nearly 6 pounds hang from your forearm, enough force to sever neck vertebrae with a single swing. In some regions, the executioner's axe head was even gilded at the spine, a grim reminder that this was a crown-sponsored practice, not amateur lumberjacking. You test the blade's edge against a scrap of straw left from yesterday's work. It parts cleanly, producing a hollow ping that echoes in the silent room. Next comes the sword, slender and long known as the Sword of Mercy in whispered court circles. Unlike your axe, the sword requires precision and discipline. In late medieval England, executioners sometimes used two-handed swords for decapitations, believing the extra control reduced botched strikes. You trace the length of its hilt, noting the intricate engraving of a crowned skull, a motif meant to signify that death comes for nobles and peasants alike. The pommel rests against a velvet-lined cradle, yet velvet does little to soften the knowledge that this blade has tasted more than its share of human mortality. Beyond these, you find the more macabre apparatus parts of the breaking wheel. Historians still argue whether the wheel's primary purpose was punitive spectacle or a quasi-medical device intended to stop criminals from crawling away in agony. You assemble the iron spokes one by one, each weighted and curved to trap limbs in contorted angles. The central axle demands a final twist, and when you lift it upright, the wheel's silhouette resembles a spiked halo, one made bitter by every turn. A fringe whisper insists that some executioners secretly believed the wheel would spin of its own accord. If the condemned was truly evil, and you catch yourself glancing around, half expecting that motionless metal to come alive. Near the corner sits a coffer, brimming with smaller instruments, The Iron Maiden cage a latecomer in the torture tool kit, thumb screws, pincers, and the dreaded garrote. The garrote's thin steel wire loops through a wooden yoke, simple, direct, lethal. You pick it up gingerly, remembering the hush that descends when it appears. You first learned that a noose could break a neck almost silently. But the garrote offers an even quieter exit, one that seemed almost merciful compared to the squeal of bone in the wheel. A battered cleaver and a heavy mallet rest nearby tools for those lesser-known rituals of execution. You shudder, recalling a fringed tale. Some executioners believed that striking the mallet first would shock the soul, making the heart's last beat tremble like a startled bird. You haven't tried that particular superstition, preferring croaked prayers over hammer blows. Yet you keep the mallet in clean view, lest a curious apprentice decide to test lore at your expense. As you arrange each item in its designated notch, the wooden table feels alive with history. Carved initials, scratched dates, and tiny symbols decorate its surface mementos left by every previous executioner for whom this room was a workplace and a confessional. You rub your fingertips over a small pentagram hidden among the initials, a remnant of someone's late-night talisman rather than a formal ritual sign. Fringe rumor? Some executioners drew protective runes in hidden corners to ward off vengeful spirits of the hanged. Whether these marks truly held power, you can't say, but they did make the table feel strangely personal, as if it shared your burden. Your gaze drifts to a low shelf where padded leather aprons hang. Thick enough to stop stray splatter, they are worn and stiff at the edges. You slip one on over your jerkin, the leather cold against your chest. You secure the straps around your waist and feel the reassuring weight settle over your abdomen like armor against the day's harshest moments. A light joke crosses your mind, fashion-forward toxic stains included. You catch yourself and force a grin. 2 jokes so far. Better save the third for after lunch. You wash your gloved hands in a basin filled with water, infused with vinegar, lingering just long enough to let the acid neutralize the faintest rust on your fingers. The tang burns your nose a price for basic maintenance. Mainstream fact medieval executioners often maintained their own implements, as town forges reserved their best smithing hours for weapons of war rather than municipal chores. That meant you learned the basics of tempering steel in between the screams of your victims. Beneath the basin, a small bundle of rabbit's feet and fox's teeth hangs from a nail your talisman collection. Each piece represents a whispered assurance luck in the swing neutrality of spirits, or perhaps the illusion of control in a job defined by sudden chaos. You finger a tiny tooth and muse that you've spent more time worrying over these charms than any sermon you've heard. A scholar might scoff, yet historians still argue whether such talismans provided genuine psychological relief or acted merely as placebo for the squeamish-hearted. You, for one, wouldn't trade that fox tooth for a month's salary. You step back and survey the room. The lantern flickers as if nodding to your readiness. Each tool bears its own stigma. The axe for its brutal efficiency, the sword for its slender cruelty, the wheel for its spectacle of suffering, and the garrote for its chilling intimacy, you realize that each instrument carries a weight heavier than its iron, an unmistakable mark of your own soul. With a final breath, you lift the axe from its cradle and cradle the handle in both hands. You pulse with the anticipation of motion, the guillotine-like descent of steel upon flesh. You place the blade gently on the table next to the sword, then close your eyes and whisper a brief sardonic prayer. May my aim be true, and may the town's laundress earn her keep. 3 light jokes tucked away, you turn toward the chamber door, tools in hand, entirely aware that the blade's weight is matched only by the stigma you carry into every village square. You trudge along a rutted dirt path leading away from the town square, the sun dipping low behind moss-covered ramparts. Your hearth lies in a squat, slate-roofed cottage beyond the graveyard's ancient yew trees, far enough that villagers treat the place like a haunted haunt. Even the crows steer clear of the yard, preferring the warmth of village rooftops. Every step you take crunches on a carpet of brittle leaves, reminding you that comfort and community end where your name begins. Nobody waves when you pass. Children freeze mid-toss of wooden hoops. Market vendors slide their barrels aside as if you'll seep taint through your boots. You remember that bleach-soaked corridor and the live fumes you breathed each dawn, and here the stench follows you home, a remembered swirl of vinegar blood residue and damp stone. It clings to your sleeves. You'd scrub until your skin peeled, but better to save semblances of normalcy for rare visits inside the town gates. Mainstream fact across medieval Europe, executioners and their kin were legally barred from joining most guilds or holding civic office, forcing entire families into outcast status and often compelling them to live beyond city walls, a grim postcode that few dared approach. Your cottage sits in that unholy no-man's land, nestled between a collapsed chapel and a field perpetually churned by plowshares. On Sunday mornings, you hear distant church bells chime, but you never answer the summons. A jest flits through your mind. Why attend Mass when you already carry everyone's sins on your shoulders? Fringe whisper, some old wives swear executioner wives stitched iron masks into their shawls to prevent townsfolk from recognizing them, while others say these masks were meant to trap evil spirits that might cling to their faces. You keep a battered iron fragment in your pantry more as a conversation piece for pests than a protective talisman. It rattles ominously every time you open the door, startling you into mild compliance with the law. On feast days, villagers in bright silks and velvet laugh in the square, tossing coins to jugglers and feasting on roasted boar. You peek from behind a shuttered window, noting every vibrant hue, crimson, emerald, cobalt colors your family's lineage never allowed. You have to remind yourself that the courtyard torchlight and bone-chilling nights were once your life's highlight. At least I'm not elbow-deep in pig intestines at the butcher's stall. You mutter 3 light jokes ahead of yourself today. School bells ring, but the nearby schoolmaster won't teach your little sister her letters. Hers is a life of whispered lessons. In a dark corner of the cottage, her quill scratching on parchment, lit by a single tallow candle. You sometimes wonder if that candle's glow keeps the isolation demons at bay. Historians still argue whether executioner lineages were truly hereditary roles, or if such myths arose simply to justify the family's unwanted station. Either way, the world outside these walls treats your bloodline like a sagas of sin. Family life here is a study in forced solidarity. Your spouse wears hemp robes and no jewelry that might tempt a curious glance. Your children learn you only marry within the executioner's circle, lest they introduce taint into respectable blood. You once tried courting a shepherd's daughter. Her innocent laughter still echoes in your dreams, but her parents forbid it, calling you the deliverer of doom. You joke that your love life peaked when you found a rabbit's foot in your pocket, but that talisman was already yours by trade. Inside your cottage's single room glows from a hearth fire that hisses when you toss on damp logs. A kettling pot simmers with barley broth, and the pungent steam carries the welcome note of vinegar, your household's multi-purpose cleaner. Your spouse passes you a chipped wooden bowl. You sit on a bench of iron-bound oak, each iron ring, a grim reminder of the chains you unshackle by day. Dinner at the iron table you quip, earning a half-smile that feels warmer than any tavern hearth. 2 jokes done, 1 to spare for the morrow. Outside, a distant howl reminds you that wolves sometimes roam these outskirts, a rare predator, but one you understand. Both hunters and hunted, you and the wolves share a bond of solitude. Fringe chatter suggests that executioners kept wolves as silent companions, teaching them to sense impending death. But your only companion is a one-eyed goat named Grisby, who bleats with uncanny timing whenever a villager approaches. Grisby's bleats have saved you more than once by signaling danger, though you suspect he's just hungry. At night, you gather with a few other executioner families in a secluded clearing where smoke from spit-roasted game mingles with the pine-scented air. These gatherings are your only tribe people who pass bread without flinching at your stained hands. You trade tales about the squeakiest wheel spokes, the slipperiest axes, and the time a judge insisted on polishing the block with goose down. You laugh until tears sting your eyes, mindful of the world that lies just beyond flickering torchlight. Yet, as dawn nears, you fold into your family's wagon, returning to the cottage, carrying the warmth of shared exile. A fringe oddity, some believe executioners held annual blood baptism ceremonies for their children at a hidden shrine under the gallows, purporting to cleanse them of inherited sin. No record confirms it, but you admit the idea makes for a captivating tale by the hearth. You imagine Grisby dunked upside down in a wooden tub, his bleats echoing like church bells gone mad. You half consider resurrecting the ritual next spring, anything to keep boredom and gossip at bay. Living here, you wear your status like chain mail, heavy, scratchy, and impossible to shrug off. Every knock on the door sets your heart racing until you see it's only the traveling peddler hawking soap. You'd greet him politely, but his eyes flick to your iron fragment, and he backs away faster than a rooster before a hawk. You can't blame him. After all, you're the one who lays heads low when law calls. Historians still argue whether ostracism of executioner families served more to uphold social order or to project communal fears onto a visible scapegoat. In your case, it's both you embody the town's darkest necessity and its deepest superstitions. Yet, amid the exile and the sneers, you nurture a strange pride, knowing that your hands alone hold the responsibility of life and death. At dusk, you wander back toward the graveyard, yew trees Grisby trailing behind. The sky's last light glints off the tombstones, each engraved name a reminder that death spares no one. You pause by your family plot, a modest stone slab smoothed by rain. You trace the letters of your surname, feeling the carved grooves beneath your fingertips. Soon enough, they say you'll join the ranks of ancestors who never knew acceptance but maintained a grim dignity. Your goat bleats proddingly, snapping you from reverie. You pat Grisby's head and chuckle softly. All right, buddy, time for supper. Inside the hearth, flare shadows dancing on the walls. The outside world may shun you, but here, in this small circle, you're more than a name. You're a keeper of order, the quiet guardian of justice. And as the night hush settles, you realize that even outcasts can carve a home of their own, one cobbled stone at a time. You slip through the low doorway of your cottage before dawn, the last embers of the hearth guttering, as you hunt for your ledger, a tattered scroll where you track every coin earned and every coin owed. The chill in the air makes each breath a small cloud, and you shake off the damp from last night's mist as you light a single candle. Its flame flickers against the rough-hewn walls, casting your writing desk in a pool of amber calm. Today is payday, or at least what passes for it in the world of medieval municipal employment. Your monthly stipend arrives in copper pennies stamped with the town's crest, a sum barely enough to cover rye bread and a handful of onions. Mainstream fact, many medieval European towns paid their executioners modest salaries, often equivalent to a craftsman's daily wage, multiplied by a handful of weeks per year. Yet responsibility for housing, tool maintenance, and travel fell squarely on your shoulders. Those pennies clatter in your palm like tin seeds, reminding you that prestige never cushioned the blow of poverty. You unroll the scroll and scan your entries: 2 executions, 1 torture session, and 1 decapitation, botched so badly you had to offer a complimentary cleaning of blood-splattered streets. That last job earned you a fine when the mayor's new shoes were spattered crimson, an officially recorded off-target blood penalty. Fringe whisper has it that one rogue executioner was fined enough to buy an entire flock of sheep after his axe sent blood arcing onto the mayor's prized peacocks. You doubt the peacocks forgave him, or that the poor birds recovered from the scare. As you tot up your meager earnings, you recall the hush money bribe from 2 weeks ago. An anxious nobleman slipped you a small leather pouch to make his private execution disappear from the public record. You tossed the pouch onto your desk and weighted in your palm 30 silver deniers, roughly a year's worth of peas for your family. You didn't ask questions. because discretion was part of the job description if asked. Say you found it in the pigsty, 3 light jokes in, and you're already due for a laugh break. You unravel the bribe pouch, its leather soft and worn, and count the glinting coins. They're heavier than the copper pennies, each one bright and new tiny suns in your palm. You tuck them away in a secret compartment of the desk, hidden beneath a false plank. Mainstream fact: it was not uncommon for executioners to accept supplemental payments, often euphemistically called gifts of mercy, from grateful families or terrified nobles who preferred a quiet disposal. Yet this extra income carried its own risks. If discovered, it could land you in the stocks, or worse. You paused to drink from a wooden cup of watered-down ale, thin, cloudy, and barely alcoholic enough to pass for breakfast. The sour tang warms your throat and loosens the morning chill, coaxing you into your first real smile of the day. You balance hat on head and lean over your ledger again, penning in the sum 48 pennies earned 30 deniers hush money, minus 12 penny fine for the mayor's shoes. Your final total reads 66 pennies and a favor owed likely to be called in when crown shift hands or records vanish. Outside your window, the first crows of dawn begin their harsh serenade, and you brace for the day's errands, paying the local blacksmith to sharpen your tools, buying straw for the block, and bribing the gravedigger to dig a hole extra deep so that rumor won't trail the bones. Fringe practice, some executioners paid grave diggers in advance to bury secret side jobs unmarked, a custom whispered about in taverns as the night shift special. You've never personally arranged one, but the thought of a pauper's unrecorded burial has its own dark comfort. You grind your quill in the inkwell and jot an entry under expenses: sharpening fee 4 pennies, straw 2 pennies, bribe to gravedigger 5 pennies. Each scribble feels like a small siege on your account, draining essentials before you even step outside. Historians still argue whether these unofficial fees and under-the-table payments were tolerated by municipal councils or quietly ignored to keep the grim reality out of public debate. Your own council pretends not to notice until someone complains. You roll up the ledger and slide it into your leather satchel pockets, bulging with curious charms. A rabbit's foot, a fox tooth, and a handful of washed river pebbles believed to soak up bad luck. One light joke crosses your mind. Maybe I should sell these as souvenirs to tourists. You tuck that thought away with a smirk. This is one town where souvenir stands might find limited appeal. Shoulder the satchel, you step into the gray morning, greeted by the soft creak of your cottage door. The dew-laden grass brushes your boots as you make your way to the town gate, where 2 guards in chain mail greet you with nods, so reluctant they might break. You hand over a copper penny, your fee for safe passage, and they part like reeds, clearing your path to the marketplace. At the blacksmith's forge, sparks fly as the smith hammers hot iron on anvil. His face is grim under soot, and he squints at you as you approach. Sharpen them well this time, you advise, recalling how your last chipped axe blade nearly cleaved only halfway through a prisoner's neck, another fine, narrowly avoided. He tucks the blade in a velvet-lined box and hands it back lean polished and deadly. Price 4 pennies, as noted. Next, you stop at the straw merchant's stall, where a wiry man offers you bundles stacked like golden loaves. Morning executioner. He calls in a tone that suggests you're more lore than livelihood. You grin and choose the driest bales available, paying 2 pennies and pocketing the straw's whispering crackle under your arm. Your final errand, visit the town clerk's office to pay the public sanitation fee for yesterday's blood spill. The clerk sits behind a tall desk, quill ready. You hand over the 12-penny fine, his gaze flickers to your blotchy sleeves. He doesn't ask for an explanation. You suspect that if you had to recite one, it would be your typical oops, Butterfingers. One more light joke in your pocket, though you doubt he'd laugh. Ledger's balanced errands complete, you return home just as noon sun breaks through heavy clouds. You tally the day's traffic official, pay hush money fines and expenses. Net profit. Roughly 50 pennies, enough to feed your family for a couple of weeks. You pour yourself a small ale and settle against the hearth, savoring the warmth and the quiet. You muse over the strange economics of death, a public service paid in coins, extra favors paid in silver, penalties paid in shame. Your profession's peculiar marketplace thrives on both fear and discretion. Historians still argue whether this informal economy corrupted justice or simply smoothed the gears of a necessary but repellent task. To you, it's both, and sometimes neither. As the ale warms your belly and the candle gutter dims, you realize that every coin, every fine, and every bribe etched into your ledger is another line on the story of your life. A story written in blood currency, told in hushes and sneers, and carried out under the cold gaze of a half-lit moon. You finish your drink, snuff the candle, and lean back into the chair's creak, ready to face another day in the marketplace of death. You rise before dawn again, guided by the soft rumble of your stomach and a lingering sense that somewhere beneath the soil, coins await their ritual return. Today isn't about sharpening axes or tallying bribes. It's all about blood money rituals, the superstitious rites you follow to keep curses at bay and restless spirits politely on their side of the grave. Stepping into the courtyard, you feel the chill settle like a damp blanket. You carry a small leather pouch containing yesterday's hush money coins, silver deniers, so bright they could pass for drops of moonlight. Your first task, bury them at the crossroads behind the scaffold. A practice locals claim prevents the dead from haunting the block. Mainstream fact. Many medieval Europeans believed crossroads were liminal spaces where spirits and souls congregated, leading to ritual depositions of coins or garments to appease wandering shades. You pause to whisper a half-joking sorry y'all as you dig a shallow hole with your dagger's tip, sliding each coin into the earth beneath tangled grass. Fringe rumor has it the coins must align heads up, facing the night sky, to catch moonbeams and guide spirits to the afterlife. You fumble in the twilight, lining up the deniers with more precision than you've ever shown during an execution. One light joke springs to mind. At least here your aim can't get you fined. You cover the pouch with soil and kick loose dirt atop it, imagining the ghosts nodding in satisfaction. Next on the list, washing your executioner's garb, thrice once in salt water, once in spring water, and once in consecrated water, blessed by a local priest. You trudge to the well behind the chapel ruins, its stones slick with moss. The water's chill bites through your gloves as you dunk the heavy woolen cloak. You swish it in the bucket until suds appear, then lift it solemnly. Fringe belief holds that the third rinse must be done at precisely sunrise, or the cleansing fails. You glance at the horizon, still 10 minutes shy of gold, but you're nothing if not punctual. Second light joke, I have better attendance than half the nobles at Mass. While you wait, you recite a prayer you half learned from a wandering friar. Bless this thread stain of red, clean my soul from what lies ahead. You muffle a smirk at the rhyme, aware that the friar probably expected you to be sobered, not chuckling behind the wool. Historians still argue whether such prayers were genuine expressions of piety or simply psychological crutches concocted by executioners to maintain composure. You decide it's both comfort in myth, solidity in ritual. Sunlight finally spills over the yew trees, glinting against distant gravestones. You wring out the cloak, its folds dripping onto the mossy ground. The spring water rinse follows swiftly, a small stream just a stone's throw away, bubbling past heart-shaped rocks. You hold the cloak aloft, letting the current pass through woven fibers, washing away more than just yesterday's grime. You imagine all the metaphoric blood dwindling into the stream 3 jokes in, and you swear your spirits feel a bit lighter. By the time you reach the chapel's ruined arch, the cloak is waterlogged but spotless. You spread it on a line of bent branches to dry sandals squelching in muddy grass. As a fringe oddity, some executioners once buried a live chicken beneath their cloak before washing it, believing the bird would absorb wandering spirits and emerge alive to chase them off. You pause at the thought, a squawking chicken resurfacing mid-ritual might spawn more curses than it banishes. You chuckle, though a bonus rooster fight might liven things up. With the cloak airing out, you retrieve a washcloth for the final consecrated rinse. You slip through the chapel doorway where the priest left a silver ewer yesterday water glimmering under stained glass fragments. Each plunge of the cloth feels like dipping guilt into absolution. You dab the hem, muttering the friar's prayer again, softer this time. You feel the cold water seep into your bones, a reminder that cleanliness, even supernatural, has its costs in shivers. Cloth done, you drape your garb over a second line, symbolic of completion. You step back, taking in the pair of water-soaked garments fluttering like limp flags. Fourth light joke. Cursed windbreaker indeed. A brisk breeze nudges the fabric, and you swear you'll hear a faint whoosh, like a spirit sighing its relief. Next, you proceed to your private shrine. Hidden beneath the gallows' base, a rough stone plaque inscribed with runes too weathered to decipher. Here you lay out your burial coins and cast off garb pieces from previous rituals. You light a tallow candle whose flame flickers in time with your pulse. The air tastes faintly of melting fat and smoky resin, a sensory twin to the tar smell of rope. Mainstream fact medieval execution sites often doubled as places of local folk worship, where villagers left votive offerings, ribbons, trinkets, coins to placate the dead and ward off misfortune. You carefully arrange your coins in a circle around the candle. You unfold a small parchment containing prayers from an obscure sect that believed cleansing rituals kept the divine order intact. You mumble each line your voice low enough that only the ravens perched above might catch a word. The verses call for mercy on the departed and protection for the living. You suspect few executioners invoked kindness in their rituals. More likely, they merely recited words for comfort. Historians still argue whether these folk chants originated from Christian liturgy or pagan rites adapted by wary locals. You don't mind either origin, as long as they ease the tension in your shoulders. When the final verse ends, you sprinkle a few drops of wine from a small flask, an offering to the spirits. Fringe practice insists the wine must be red, symbolically linking to the blood once shed there. You grimace at the tang and wipe your lips on your sleeve. After all, you've yet to invent spirit wine that doesn't taste like vinegar with ambition. As the candle gutter dims, you extinguish its flame with a solemn breath, leaving only the gray wisp of smoke and the faint scent of wax. You scoop up the coins and fold your garb pieces, stacking them neatly for tomorrow's cleansing round. The shrine falls silent once more, a private chapel to toil and terror. You step away, running gloved fingers through your hair as the rising sun warms your back. The crossroads burial, the triple wash, the shrine, offering rituals that might sound absurd to an outsider, yet each act restores a fraction of your inner equilibrium. You shoulder your cloak, now damp, but ritually pure, and tug the brim of your hat. You feel oddly refreshed, as if the courtyard's miasma has been scrubbed from your soul. On the path back to your cottage, you pause by the yew trees and glance at the distant bustle of the town awakening. Carts creak, roosters crow, and bellows echo from the blacksmith's forge. You catch your reflection in a puddle-gritty face framed by a damp cloak, eyes clear despite the morning's arcane tasks. You whisper, ready for another day of dividing justice from chaos. Fifth, light joke. And yes, my laundry service is included. You step over the threshold of home just as the kettle whistles a mundane soundtrack to a morning steeped in mysticism. You hang your cloak to dry above the hearth, and your spouse hands you a crust of bread and a bowl of thin broth. No one asks about your ceremony. In your household, these rituals are as normal as breakfast. You take a bite and savor the simple comfort of warm broth, the flavors grounding you in ways incantations cannot. As you eat, a crow alights on the sill, peering in with one glossy eye, unofficial witness to yesterday's deed. You wave the bird away gently, thinking, careful, now your presence might be construed as an omen. You chuckle softly, 3 jokes delivered for the morning. Packed with ritual and superstition, your blood-soaked garments feel lighter today. Each buried coin, each aqueous immersion, each whispered prayer stitches another layer of resilience into your weary spirit. And though some might scoff at these rites, you know they're as vital as the axe on your shoulder. Without them, the courtyard's shadows might reach out and pull you into the soil alongside those forgotten souls, ready for the day's grim business, yet armed with freshly cleansed conviction, you step outside into sunlight that finally feels earned. The crossroads coins rest, the shrine bank closed for business, and your garb flutters in the breeze like a victory flag. You crack a final grin. May the spirit stay buried, the stains wash away, and my aim stay true. You cradle your little sister's hand as you approach the schoolhouse door, the morning sun slanting through the dusty air. Her braid swings at her shoulder, and she hums a timid tune about daisies and sunshine, innocent enough to bloom anywhere except here. You pause where the teacher's name is carved in fading chalk, the slate-black sign almost swallowing the letters. When you knock, the silence stretches like a noose. A slit in the door slides open just enough to reveal a stern eye. Executioner's kin, the teacher mutters, voice muffled by the wood. You nod, swallowing the burn in your throat. You've rehearsed this line 1,000 times. We're sorry, child, he says, voice flat. No place for you here. The door closes before you can plead mercy on her behalf. You feel your heart twist as you turn away, your sister's small shoulders drooping. Medieval fact, by the 14th century, children of executioners were often barred from public schools and guild apprenticeships deemed unclean by association and denied formal education alongside peers. Yet no legal edict codified this ostracism. It thrived in whispered consensus rather than written law. Fringe rumor, some villages claimed executioner offspring were born with a streak of white in their hair, a so-called stain of sin, visible from birth. You glance at your sister's braid, half expecting a moonlit stripe, but see only glossy brown. You guide her down the lane past the chapel, its bell tolling a solemn note that you once believed would comfort you. Today, it chafes like metal on metal. At the churchyard gate, you kneel and hold out her small palm. The sacristan, an austere woman wrapped in wool, inspects her hand as if searching for a brand. Baptismal roll is closed to you, she whispers, sealing your sister's fate with a finality sharper than any blade. You swallow, tasting bitterness. The stone under your knees is lichen cracked, and the scent of burning incense drifts toward you. Smoky sandalwood meant to elevate prayers, but here it tastes like ash in your mouth. You rise, fingertips tingling from cold stone. A fringed detail you once heard, families sometimes commissioned rogue priests to baptize children in secret wells, believing water drawn from below the village would bypass earthly prejudices. You consider leading your sister to the old well behind the yew trees, though rumors say ghosts linger there, teaching lessons sharper than any sermon. Every step home feels weighted. You tighten your cloak against the chill, recalling that your own baptismal rite was recorded in a remote parish register kept by monks afraid to sully their ledgers with your surname. Historians still argue whether executioner lineages were formally excommunicated or simply shunned through local custom. Either way, the effect is the same. Your family is marooned on the margins of faith and learning. At home, your brother is waiting by the hearth, cheeks flushed from chopping wood. He lifts an axe with practiced ease and irony that doesn't escape you. "How did school go?" he asks. voice hopeful. You kneel and meet his eyes. She's not allowed, you say softly. His shoulders sag, the wood chunk slipping from his grasp. A clatter echoes against the stone floor. You crack a weak smile, trying to lighten the moment. On the bright side, at least their hoops will roll better without us stepping on them. It elicits a half smile and a nod, your first laugh of the morning. Your sister retreats to a corner with a scrap of charcoal and a piece of wood, sketching daisies as you watch. You slide beside her, gently smoothing a stray hair from her brow. One day, I'll teach you everything you promise, voice low and soothing like an ASMR whisper. Math letters, maybe even sword play if you're feeling rebellious. She giggles, a soft chime that makes your chest unclench. You joke. Just remember, if you duel, me aim for my greasy hat. That's where I keep my secrets. Afternoon brings errands. You head to the guild hall to secure apprenticeship notices for your younger brother. The door is crowned by a painted crest of shaking hands, symbol of cooperation. When you knock, a clerk peers out, Quill paused midair. Not for you, he says curtly, then turns away. You imagine a spotlight on your rejection, as if the walls themselves point and laugh. Fringe anecdote, a traveling bard once rewrote the village anthem to include a verse about the family who mows but never grows, a mocking ode to executioner kin. You shiver at the thought of hearing that tune at every feast. On the way back, you pass the tavern where the other executioner families gather. Inside, the firelight flickers across familiar faces, painted masks of solidarity. You step into the warmth, and they greet you without hesitation. One uncle hands you a mug of ale, rich and redolent of barley. You take a sip, letting the ember glow soothe the sting of the day. A cousin laughs, recounting a tale of her daughter, who recited prayers aloud in perfect Latin prayers she'd taught herself from discarded scraps of missal pages. They cheer at the ingenuity, raising their mugs in salute. You lean into the camaraderie, letting their acceptance fill the hollow ache left by church and school. Historians still argue whether executioner enclaves form true sub-communities or merely clusters of necessity. Here you see both a circle of kin bound by fate and choice. You crack a joke. If any of you need someone to test your noose, I'm your man, prompting raucous laughter that eases a knot in your gut. Night falls as you walk home under a sky dusted with stars. Fireflies drift among the hedgerows, blinking like tiny torches in the dark. You carry your sister's drawings in your satchel, daisies, hoops, and a lone white stripe in one sketch, as though she's daring fate to mark her. You pause by the schoolhouse, now shuttered and silent. The moonlight gilds the doorway in silver, and for a moment you imagine it unlocked welcoming. But reality tugs you back. At home, you hang your satchel and gather your siblings close. By the flickering hearth, you speak softly. We'll learn together, you whisper. Books won't last, but stories live forever. You hand your sister a scrap of parchment and a stub of chalk. You found them in the tavern's corner, hidden among spilled straw. Let's make our own school, you suggest. Her eyes glitter, and she sketches a daisied crest on the floorboards, a secret sigil of hope. The room fills with quiet determination, and the scratch of charcoal on wood. You settle behind them, opening your leather satchel as if it were a classroom desk. First lesson, the alphabet you announce in a stage whisper, savoring the thrill. Your brother repeats each letter with exaggerated care, and your sister draws loops and lines under your guidance. 3 jokes tucked in one about spelling executioner and hoping to fail that test, another about their teacher's missing chalk, and a third about your secret tutor's drooling goat. Laughter ripples around the room, a warm cloak against the chill of exclusion. As embers glow low, you realize that family ties may be severed by custom. But here, in your cottage, the bond is stronger than any decree. You're forging an education of your own, making one chalk line at a time. Outside, the church bell tolls a distant lament. You let it ring, knowing your clan has found a sanctuary beyond its walls. You collapse onto your straw-stuffed pallet, just as the moon's pale glow seeps through the narrow window, slit the chill of the courtyard stones lingering behind your ribs. Your eyelids flutter as you settle beneath a threadbare blanket, one that still smells faintly of vinegar from last night's wash. And you pray for a silent night. Instead, you're greeted by the old familiar tremor, your heart thumping like a trapped crow, your mind replaying every drop of blood you've spilled. Mainstream fact medieval medical treatises often blame nightmares on an imbalance of humors, especially excess black bile and recommended infusions of valerian or lavender to soothe the mind before sleep. You've tried every herb in the apothecary's catalog from chamomile to horehound tea, but nothing quiets the ghosts in your head. You take one sip of lukewarm valerian brew grimace as it tastes like fermented socks and count your blessings that at least it didn't make you hallucinate frogs. Your dreams begin, innocently enough. You're back in the courtyard, the same slick cobblestones underfoot, the same dripping rat darting through crimson puddles. But then the shadows stretch into impossible shapes, elongated arms reaching out from the walls, their fingers curled like talons. Whispered dirges drift on the air, a low chant in a language you almost recognize from that midnight ritual beneath the gallows. Release us, the voices moan soft yet insistent. You clutch your rabbit's foot talisman so tightly it feels like you're strangling your only friend. Fringe tidbits some executioners tucked a small hand mirror under their pillows, believing that any trapped soul would be reflected back into their own realm rather than clinging to your dreams. You tried it once only to find the glass fogged with what looked like tiny handprints by dawn, a prank of your own tossing and turning, or something more spectral. You can't decide, so now you switch nightly between mirror and onion clove, convinced that at least one will confuse the spirits and let you rest. In the next vision, you're standing under the gallows moonlight, pooling at your feet. Grisby the goat appears beside you, his one good eye glinting with knowing mischief as if he's in on the joke. Behind him, shimmering figures rise from shallow graves, their faces twisted in silent screams. The air carries the scent of burned pitch and spilled vinegar, eerily reminiscent of your first cleaning duty in the damp corridor. You hear a distant hammering. Was that the breaking wheel turning on its own? you jerk awake heart lodged in your throat and find yourself gasping in the dark. You lie there, body shimmering with sweat, clutching your blanket like a life raft. Your throat feels raw like you've been chanting those dirges yourself. Sleep abandons you, leaving only the hum of a distant lantern and the rhythmic drip of water from the courtyard gutter. 3 light jokes in the last hour, one about nightmares being the cheapest form of horror show, no ticket needed, another about using your axe as a bedside lamp if things get too dark, and a third about marketing ghost tours as additional municipal revenue. Grim marketing genius, you muse. The toll on your mind is no laughing matter. Medieval scholars noted that repetitive exposure to violence could warp perception and cause tremors, memory lapses, and chronic insomnia. You wake most nights at the first creak of floorboards, convinced a restless spirit has returned to settle its unfinished score. Historians still argue whether executioners were uniquely prone to mental maladies, or simply as resilient as any tradesman wielding dangerous tools. To you, it feels like balancing on a razor's edge between sanity and whatever lies beyond. Come dawn, you stumble out of bed, bones protesting like rusty hinges. You can't muster the energy to scrub off the residue of terror, so you toss your cloak over your shaking shoulders, its damp fabric cold against your skin. You drag yourself to the well and splash cold water on your face, gingerly wiping away salty beads that might be tears or sweat. You can't tell the difference. You pop a fox-tooth talisman into your mouth like a jawbreaker, hoping it'll ground you in the waking world. You consider visiting the apothecary for a stronger draft, perhaps poppy wine, to lull your dreams. But you remember the last time you ended up losing 3 hours in a fugue where you thought you were headless yourself. Not exactly the most restful vacation. Instead, you settle for a wink of coffee. If medieval baristas existed, you'd knight them for the miracle brew. You sip it with the same reverence you reserve for your axe before an execution. A modern aside, you'd kill for a therapist now, but the only couch on offer here is a slab in the guardhouse, and you doubt they'd approve of your frequent flinches. By midday, your fellow executioner families notice your pale cheeks and ask if you've seen a worse case of night call duty yet. You joke that the only thing worse than a midnight hangover is a midnight haunt-over. They laugh, passing around a flask of watered-down ale that tastes like candor and relief. You lean into their solidarity, though a part of you wonders how long this communal patchwork can hold, when each of you is stitching wounds no one else sees. That night, you resolve to try one last tactic. You lay out a circle of rose petals around your pallet, an old wives' charm said to soften nightmares into dreams of love rather than horror. You even toss in a sprig of mugwort, claiming it will guide happy visions. You whisper your own prayer, "May any wandering soul find rest, not drag me into unrest." You laugh softly at your borrowed optimism, realizing this bedside bouquet looks more like a witch's wreath than a bedspread. As you close your eyes, the world tilts into dream once more. This time, the rat from the corridor scuttles by carrying a small lantern, leading you through a misty grove ringed by headstones. A ghostly choir hums a lullaby, soft and sorrowful. You follow the light step by step until it fades at the base of your own grave marker. There you stand before your empty name, etched in stone. Your name here, beloved executioner. You reach out, fingertips brushing cold marble, and feel a quiet hush descend. The choir's song becomes a gentle heartbeat, and you realize the spirits aren't mocking you. They're inviting you to acknowledge that you too deserve mercy. The dream shifts petals swirling at your feet, and for the first time in countless nights, you breathe without fear. The goat Grisby appears once more, if only as a flicker in the corner of your eye, bleating a lullaby that carries you into a quiet sleep. When morning arrives, you wake feeling strangely unburdened, as though you've handed over your nightmares to the past. You stretch with goosebumps, the dawn's light filtering through rosy scented air. You rise and face the day's grim duties with the faintest hint of hope, armed not just with axe and sword, but with the fragile knowledge that even the darkest nightmares can be softened by a whisper, a charm, and perhaps a goat's lullaby. You push open the tavern's heavy oak door and step into a haze of smoke ale and rowdy laughter, the kind of welcome that feels dirtier than the courtyard corridor, yet somehow more comforting. Sawdust carpets the floor, and straw-stuffed benches hug broad-scarred faces. A burly mercenary in chainmail pats the seat beside him, nodding you over with a rough grin that reads, "You look like you've seen better days." Mainstream fact by the late Middle Ages alehouses had proliferated across Europe, serving as communal gathering spots where townspeople and itinerant soldiers alike drowned their worries under wooden mugs. Some towns boasted one tavern per 100 residents. You inhale the heady mix of hops and smoke, feeling the tension in your shoulders loosen like a released noose. Fringe whisper. Certain executioners were rumored to carry small barrels of their own ale brewed with a pinch of iron filings to stay in tune with their profession's taste, though in your experience, iron-rich beer tastes mostly like drinking rusty nails. You slide onto the bench and accept a mug sloshing with amber liquid. The ale's froth tickles your lips as you take a sip, eyes fluttering at the sharp warmth. You can almost taste the vinegar of the courtyard rinse mingling with barley bliss, your private brew of guilt and relief. 3 light jokes ping through your mind. One about marketing sawdust spa services, another about charging patrons extra when you're feeling particularly chatty, and a third about installing tiny gallows outside as thematic decor. You stifle your grin as the mercenary next to you glances over. He elbows you and says in a low growl, "Heard you did the block this morning." Clean cut, you nod, wiping foam from your beard-like stubble. Smooth enough, you say, but if I'm honest, I think the block owes me a shave. He roars with laughter, sloshing ale onto the table. A group of guards at the far end raise their mugs in salute, their clang echoing against the rafters. Historians still argue whether alehouse camaraderie genuinely offered executioners a reprieve or simply served as another stage for public scrutiny. Here, amid the bellowing toasts and clinking mugs, you find both a place where your sorrow is met with a knowing nod and a space where rumors swirl as freely as the beer. You lean in as the mercenary recounts his latest campaign, a skirmish on the frontier where arrows rained like hail and officers were beheaded more by politics than any sword. You listen enthralled by tales of far-off wars, grateful to be far from the plague-ridden siege lines. The tavern's walls plastered with gaudy flyers, advertising upcoming jousts and shameless romances. Lady Gwendolen seeks steadfast, squire-preferred experience, dragon-slaying feel like a carnival for the broken. You lean back, letting the room's warmth chase the chill from your bones. Next to you, a soldier bears a grin as he lifts his mug to the only man in the county whose shoulder bears both axe scar and shame scar. We salute you. They hoist their cups, and you join in ale sloshing over the rim as you toast to your own disrepute. A fringed tale drifts to your ears. An executioner once staged a noose karaoke night where patrons belted out dirges while dangling from a friendly quarterstaff, judged by a panel of mercenaries. You scoff at the absurdity, yet marvel at the creativity. Only in a tavern could such macabre revelry thrive. You crack a joke. If my singing's half as deadly as my swing, they'll have to bribe me to stop. Laughter erupts again, and you're anchored in that moment, forgetting for a heartbeat the ghosts waiting at home. Between rowdy toasts, you offer a few of your own grim anecdotes, the time the judge sneezed at the precise moment of decapitation, sending the head flying clear off the block. Or when a sheep wandered into the courtyard mid-execution, bleeding in protest, and earning the title of unofficial execution mascot for the day. Each tale lands with a mix of horror and hilarity, exactly the blend you crave after a morning's work. The barkeep, a barrel-chested woman with a scar slicing her eyebrow, slides another mug your way and says, "Your first one's on us. Think of it as blood money rebate." You raise an eyebrow retort, better than a slap on the wrist. She smirks, perhaps sensing a kindred dark humor, and turns away to fetch more ale. As the candles gutter and embers glow low in the hearth, you decide to stay for the night's downstairs special. A pie made of ale-soaked bread and minced pork, guaranteed to stick to your ribs. You settle your tab with a handful of pennies, mindful of fines and hush money still tucked in your purse. The mercenary next to you offers to cover your share, claiming you've earned it, friend. You decline with a chuckle. "Sorry, I promised the goats a tip tonight." He laughs, slapping the table. Later, you shuffle toward the back corner where the bench stretches into a rough sleeping area. You brush aside a coil of rope and lie down, pulling the scratchy blanket from your satchel. A mug wobbles on a nearby crate, its ring echoing like a distant bell. You feel the sleep creeping in as the room's bouzouki-like brawl of laughter and shouts fades into the background. In the swirling haze of warmth and exhaustion, you dream of axes singing through the air and alehouses humming lullabies. You remember the courtyard's stone coldness, then the tavern's fire-crackled crackle, and realize that neither realm offers perfect refuge. Yet together, they forge the tenuous balance you rely on. When dawn's first light slants through the stained window panes, you wake on your makeshift pallet to the tavern stillness. The sawdust smells sweeter than any herb infusion back home, and the faint aroma of last night's ale lingers like a benediction. You stand hack a silent cough and nod to the mercenaries who stir awake. You shoulder your pack and step back into sunlight, the line between executioner and outcast, softened by camaraderie and clinking mugs. You blink against the morning glare, reforge your resolve, and stride toward the courtyard gates, trading tavern warmth for courtyard chill guilt for duty, and one bench's comfort for the next grim spectacle. You stand beneath the gnarled archway of the justice hall, its stone pillars carved with scales of justice, though you'd swear those scales are perpetually tilted against you. Inside, the air hangs heavy with parchment dust and the metallic tang of ink. A clerk's quill scratches across a new ordinance, and you realize you're both the enforcer and the exception to every rule etched here. Mainstream fact in many medieval jurisdictions, executioners were considered infamous, officially infamous, and legally disenfranchised, meaning they could not testify and court-owned property outright or seek recourse if wronged. You step forward to present your axe inspection certificate, only to remember it holds weight only at the scaffold, not in any courtroom dispute. You approach the chancery clerk's desk, where a high-backed bench groans under the weight of leather-bound tomes. His narrow eyes flick up at your stained sleeves. "Executioner," he intones without curiosity, stacking parchments like coffins. You produce your gilded writ of appointment, a royal mandate, granting you authority to execute sentences. The clerk scans it, then sighs. Valid for death sentences only. For disputes, you're, let's say, between jurisdictions. A fringe tidbit drifts through local gossip. Some executioners carried a death warrant exemption scroll, believing it shielded them from municipal laws, except it was merely a stripped-down version of their appointment, essentially a fancy scrap of paper. You once waved such a scroll at a bailiff who tried to fine you for a trespassing goat. He chuckled and demanded 2 pennies anyway. You're ushered before the chamber's judge, a rotund man in velvet robes who smells faintly of cloves and ambition. He peers over his spectacles, balancing a gold seal between his fingers. "Executioner," he says, voice smooth as polished marble. "The city council demands your presence for a new ordinance regarding the height of gallows platforms." You force a polite nod, aware that your own stake in the matter carries no legal weight, even though you're the only one who'll stand on it. Historians still argue whether executioners were independent contractors under royal patronage or municipal employees at the mercy of local councils. In practice, it meant your loyalty was always split, our allegiance to the crown's writ, yet depend on town magistrates for your next meal. You clear your throat, hoping your writ will speak louder than custom, but it's buried in a stack labeled Miscellaneous Deadly Affairs. The judge motions you to a tall stool beside the bench. You perch on it, boots dangling, feeling conspicuous among silk-clad scribes and horned helmets of the bailiffs. The judge unrolls a parchment. By decree, gallows platforms shall stand no higher than 5 feet, to spare swooning onlookers. You blink 5 feet. That's barely enough to clear a tall man's head. You suppress a smirk. Justice, with a view your third joke thus far. A clerk snickers into his sleeve, earning a rebuke from the judge. You clear your throat. May I inquire why you ask, voice steady despite trepidation? The judge leans back, eyes half-lidded. Public morals, dear executioner. Too high and the spectacle becomes indecent. You nod gravely, picturing yourself craning awkwardly to align the axe. Modern aside, I guess we can't have executioners ruining someone's lungful of fresh air. You joke softly, but the judge offers only measured silence. As the council debates, you realize your own legal protections are as shaky as your first swing. Should a guard mishandle your axe and chip the blade, no statute requires compensation unless you can convince the crown, a task easier said than done. Fringe whispers suggest executioners once demanded a year's salary up front, as performance bond returned only if they maintained a flawless record. You'd like to try that practice, but you suspect the mayor's treasury would collapse under the weight of your demands. During a recess, you wander the hall's corridor, running a finger along the carved wooden panels depicting past trials and punishments. There's the scene of a witch burned at the stake flames, licking skyward, and a convicted murderer pushed from the city wall, his wings snapped by gravity. You think, at least that guy had gravity on his side. Jokes aside, these images remind you that your job isn't just execution. It's upholding a legal theater that thrives on fear and discipline. A fellow executioner from a neighboring shire greets you in hushed tones, his breath smelling faintly of ale. He presses a folded scrap of paper into your hand, a list of sympathetic magistrates who might defend you if rogue bailiffs try to bilk your pay. You stash the note beneath your jerkin, grateful for clandestine alliances. You tap your fox-toothed talisman, a silent promise that you'll return the favor should he need a discreet dispatch. Back in the chamber, the council votes on new fees, a fee for bringing corpses to the block, a fee for disposing of entrails, and a crowd control surcharge whenever more than 50 villagers gather. The judge tallies votes while you tally your regrets. No benefit to your household, just more lines on your expense scroll. You slip a look at the high window sunlight, streams in gilding motes in the dust like suspended confetti. Yet the room feels suffocating. Historians still argue whether these incremental fees reflected genuine municipal needs or cynical exploitation of a captive market. You lean forward, tone measured. Your Honor, may we reconsider the surcharge? My wages barely cover straw for the block. Plus, I hear crows resent high cover charges. A clerk snickers, and the judge raises a finger. Noted executioner, he says, stamping the parchment. But the fee stands. Perhaps you can offer a loyalty program. You exhale, slipping off the stool. The session ends, and you exit into the courtyard, nostrils flaring at the crisp air scented with distant lilacs and spilled ale. Outside the street, throngs with citizens' children mimicking gallows silhouettes, merchants hawking executioner hats for a laugh. You pass with stoic grace, though the memory of the day's indignities simmers on your tongue. A guard approaches, saluting with a grin. "Evening, sir," he says. "Council's decision was final, they say. Need an escort home tonight." His tone is genial, though you know it masks a hint of condescension. Be careful, you infamous one. You nod and accept. His chainmail clinks like gentle bells. It's a small kindness. From a profession sworn to enforce orders you can't challenge. On the walk back, you mull the contradictions of your loyalty to the crown which grants you authority, to the town which grudgingly pays you, and to your own conscience which trembles under every stroke of the axe. Fringe voices call executioners midwives of justice, yet midwives receive thanks and blessings, while you receive curses and fines. You crack a dry smile, if only I delivered babies, you mutter. Your guard chuckles politely, and you realize solidarity can arrive in chainmail as well as alehouses. At home, you refresh your brine-soaked cloak in a basin, murmuring the friar's prayer under your breath. The latest ordinances weigh on you worse than any blade. You wonder if future generations will remember executioners as necessary administrators of law, or as outcasts, dancing on the edges of justice. Historians still argue, but tonight, you just need clean water and a decent night's sleep. You hang the cloak to dry its folds, swaying like a ghostly curtain. You toast an empty cup of thin broth to the fickle gods of law and order, muttering, to loyalty that comes with a side of limbo. You sip, savoring the warmth, and brace yourself for tomorrow's spectacle, equipped not just with axe and sword, but with the brittle knowledge that in the courts of men, even executioners stand on uncertain ground. You step onto the platform, the wooden boards creaking under your boots like a drum roll for the final act. The condemned stands before you, neck bared to the chill breeze, hands trembling against the coarse rope of the noose that still hangs nearby. His lifeline today repurposed as a backup. You're here not for hanging, but for the beheading, the most efficient method in your grim toolkit. A live audience presses against the barricade, children on tiptoe, merchants with stale bread in mouth, a noble or two surveying from a balcony draped in velvet. The air is thick with anticipation, the sort of collective breath hold that makes your own breath feel loud. Mainstream fact by the 15th century beheading was often reserved for nobility or high-status criminals in many European courts, considered a merciful death compared to the wheel or burning. You adjust the pile of straw to catch the spray and ease the prisoner's head into the carved groove of the block, a notch carved precisely to cradle the skull. You've studied the neck's anatomy more than any barber surgeon, tracing the jugular vein's path, the slender throat's vulnerable groove. Your schooling came not from parchments, but from countless practices on carts of condemned sheep, unlawful perhaps, but effective. Fringe tidbit, some executioners claimed they could discern a prisoner's guilt by the thickness of their neck, believing that a well-fed noble's girth signified sin-heavy indulgence. You can't help but smirk at that notion. After all, you've met skinny bandits with hearts blacker than any baron. You draw your axe from its peg, feeling its familiar heft pulse in your hands. The polished edge gleams, and you eye the steel like a surgeon sizing up a scalpel if scalpel had a thirst for crimson. You place your palm on the axe's pole and step into position. A hush settles, Then a lone crow caws from the rafters as if giving you last-minute moral support. 3 light jokes surface, "Hey buddy, mind chiming in when I botch this swing? Thanks for the vote of confidence, bird." And next time, maybe switch to interpretive dance. You remind yourself, precise angle, perfect swing. The ideal cut should bisect the neck just behind the ear, passing cleanly through the spinal column between C2 and C3. Mainstream fact contemporary medical scribes noted that nerves in that region are sparse enough to allow a single stroke to sever head and body, cleanly minimizing suffering, a technical marvel for medieval engineers of execution. Historians still argue whether the goal was truly mercy or mere spectacle, dressed in the language of efficiency. Your arm arcs back, the axe's blade catching the morning light. The prisoner's eyes flick to yours, crying out perhaps for forgiveness, perhaps simply aware that his final moment has come. You inhale, tasting iron on your tongue. Your muscles coil like springs. In a modern aside, you think a guillotine might be more user-friendly. But that's French innovation for you, never mind that the mechanics could jam. You prefer keeping control in your own hands, literally. Then forward. The blade descends in a ritual faster than a heartbeat, the wood echoing as steel meets bone. A rose of blood blooms across the block, its petals unbidden. The crowd gasps, some waver, others cheer. The head detaches with a whisper of sinew and drops onto the straw with a muted thud. You catch it with the flat of your axe before it rolls into the dust, presenting it to the judge's bench. A ritual flourish more dramatic than necessary. A guard steps forward and tilts the head so the judge can confirm identity. The lips move as if still breathing, and you think you catch a whispered why, but perhaps it's only the wind in the castle's eaves. Fringe practice held that judges sometimes sealed the head's lips with cloth and vinegar to prevent last curses. You've never attempted it. Mushy cloth over slick flesh seems messy. Instead, you nod to the guard who lifts it high for all to see, then lays it gently beside the body. Your axe smeared with fresh gore hums with residual energy. You wipe the blade on a cap of linen, chuckling at your own twitch note to self add laundry service to next guild pitch. 2 jokes down, 1 to spare. You return the axe to its peg, its edge stained, but its balance unbroken. Now comes the cleaning. You step aside as assistants wheel in barrels of cold water and vinegar, sluicing the block until the red runoff flows clear. The crew scrubs the straw and sprays the plank beneath with a hose of tears disguised as water. You supervise ensuring every droplet of evidence is rinsed away. Mainstream fact municipal ordinances sometimes fined executioners for unsightly stains visible from the marketplace, so maintenance was part of the job description. Historians still argue whether these fines protected public sensibilities or simply padded local coffers. While the block dries, you kindle a small fire in a brazier and heat a kettle of oil. Grandfather's remedy, they say, to cauterize stray droplets that cling to the wood. Fringe lore suggested adding rosemary to the oil would mask the scent of blood. But after one test, you quit when cooks in the nearby tavern complained about bacon tasting like incantations. With everything cleaned, you bow your head in a brief, silent nod, lest anyone accuse you of celebrating. 3 light jokes remain lodged in your ribs, but you save them for the tavern on the walk home. The crowd disperses, some relieved, others still gazing at where life once pulsed. A sobbing child's mother gathers her around whispering lessons about honesty and mercy. Or was it about taking only what didn't belong to you? You can't always tell. As you descend from the platform, the judge's clerk presses a parchment into your hand, the official death warrant stamped and ready for the archives. You tuck it away in your satchel alongside your ledger, and that small sketch of daisies, your sister drew proof that life persists, even where death reigns. You step off the dais boots, returning to familiar cobblestones. The crowd parts as you pass a path cleared not by respect, but by dread. You catch your reflection in a bowed lantern, blood-brown tunic, steel-traced gaze, and that cursed-brimmed hat, oversized enough to hold your secrets. You laugh softly, stylish as ever. With the day's dirge complete, you walk toward the tavern where sawdust benches await and mugs clink in hesitant solidarity. You think of your next ritual, burying the coins, washing the garb, whispering prayers, and realize that each beheading isn't just a job, but another chapter in your complicated vocation. The block behind you looks smaller now, its grooves fading under the morning sun. You feel a mixture of pride and unease, a craftsman's satisfaction tempered by the weight of taking another life. But duty calls, and in a world that depends on your steady arm, you must carry on, one swing at a time. You tread the mossy path that skirts the old gallows pit, dew-soaked yew needles crunching underfoot, and a damp breeze carrying the faint scent of vinegar and ash reminding you of the courtyard corridor you learned to loathe back in Section 2. Locals clutch their cloaks and whisper of the executioner who once swung his axe so wildly he beheaded his own horse instead of the condemned criminal, sending the poor beast's head rolling across the cobblestones like a grotesque carnival prop. Mainstream fact-botched executions were far from mythical. In 16th century England, municipal records show executioners fined for missing the mark, sometimes requiring 2 or 3 blows to complete a beheading, a fiasco that delayed public proclamations and soaked the block in both blood and bureaucracy. Yet this horse beheading anecdote has grown in the retelling, the horse's final whinny, echoing in every retold version as an unintended punchline, a joke no one asked for. You pause beneath a crooked gallows beam, its wood blackened by centuries of rain, and a whisper flits through the branches. They say the skulls left on spikes will weep tears of rust. Fringe lore holds that during a full moon, droplets of liquid reddish and sticky ooze from the eye sockets of severed heads displayed on city gates, trickling down like silent confession. You shudder, fingers tightening around your rabbit's foot talisman. Remember that little charm from Section 6? Half believing the toe bone might squeak in protest. A chill wind stirs the mist, and you imagine ghostly figures drifting through the yew groves, mouths opening in mute lament. Historians still argue whether these weeping skulls were pious morality tales crafted by churchmen to deter crime or genuine folk beliefs. born from natural condensation trickling through porous bone. Either way, the idea seeps under your skin more effectively than the damp. You trace your steps toward an ancient oak, where villagers once bound the noose to test its rope strength, another practice that spawned its own legends. One fringe tale says an executioner's apprentice tested the rope by hanging a sheep, only to find it still twitching at midnight, a bleeding echo that haunted his dreams for a fortnight. You stifle a laugh. Nothing says career regret like running into a half-dead sheep at your bedside. A distant crow calls its harsh caw reverberating off stately tombstones. You remember Grisby's uncanny timing section 4 like that one evening? You both leaned against the fence and watched shadows morph into galloping hoof prints. Here, the crow feels like a collaborator in the lore, as if it's narrating the legends for you. A modern aside, you'd kill for a sports announcer's voice right now. And here comes Crow swooping in for yet another head's tearful encore. The path slopes down to a murky pond where villagers once tossed coins to placate restless spirits accustomed. You performed yourself by the crossroads back in Section 6. A mossy stump nearby bears scratched initials and crude sketches of skulls, with teardrops, a folk art gallery curated by anxious hands. You kneel to inspect the carving's fingers, brushing stone as cold as the blade of your axe. One carving shows the horse's silhouette headless galloping toward a cliff's edge, an artist's grim joke that's outlasted any official record. Mainstream fact medieval gallows sites often doubled as communal spaces for rites of penance and legend-telling, with folk tales passed verbally long before parish scribes penned official accounts. Some scholars note that these oral traditions offered moral commentary on justice, turning real tragedies into cautionary epics. Historians still argue whether the oral lore truly influenced legal reforms or remained mere campfire tales. You rise and brush straw from your jerkin as you step over a shallow root, recalling how in Section 9 you found refuge in the tavern's sawdust-scented warmth. Here, away from clinking mugs and raucous laughter, the silence presses in like the hush before an executioner's swing. Fringe whispers say that if you leave a silver coin on this stump under a waxing moon, a phantom rider will appear demanding payment for a soul you never sold in eerie marketplace for misbegotten bargains. You tuck a copper penny into your pocket more out of ironic solidarity than genuine fear. The mist thickens, and you recall that rabbit's foot shifting in your pouch as if protesting the shift from rational caution to borderland superstition. You shrug and move on, boots squelching through soggy leaves toward the gallows base. There, a carved stone altar bears the faint remnants of a chalk sigil eerily similar to the daisied crest your sister sketched in Section 7, a secret symbol of hope amid decay. You wonder if unseen hands return to refresh the drawing when no one watches. Beneath the gallows, you find a ring of small stones, an unmarked shrine where executioners once conducted blood bond rites, scattering soil from previous executions and whispering prayers to ward off ancestral curses. Fringe practice insisted that if you stepped outside the circle before completing the incantation, you'd suffer a vision of your worst failure. You step carefully, defying the superstition with a smirk. Worst failure, that botched sheep job still haunts me. As the sun breaks through the mist, you feel the pull of reality, beckoning errands to run tools to sharpen bribes to balance. Yet the legends cling like cobwebs to your mind, each tale a twisted mirror of your daily toil. You rub your temples, breathing in the crisp air tinged with pine and damp stone. One joke surfaces. Maybe I should start a guided ghost tour, meet the weeping skulls a live spectacle. You chuckle, imagining the ticket sales. Finally, you ascend the path back toward the town walls, the mist giving way to midday clarity. You pass beneath the gallows' empty beam, its silhouette less ominous in daylight, and feel a strange kinship with every executioner who ever stood here, balancing duty and dread. Mainstream fact over time, many gallows were dismantled or relocated beyond city limits, as sensibilities shifted a practice that mirrored the decline of public execution spectacles by the 18th century. Historians still argue whether this evolution reflected genuine humanitarian reform or simply changing tastes in public entertainment. You push through the town gate, the murmur of the marketplace rising to meet you. Vendors hawking apples, children chasing hoops, and someone in the crowd humming The Family Who Mows but Never Grows from Section 7's bardic parody. You straighten your jerkin and press a silent thanks to the rabbit's foot as you return to your ledger and your axe ready to turn legend into lived reality once more. You return to your rickety desk, settling your blood-stained quill in its inkwell as candlelight flickers across your ledger's open pages. Outside, muted footsteps echo through the courtyard, but here you pause, axe and ledger laid aside to ponder the nature of your calling. You run a finger along a fresh entry, the ink still damp, and feel the weight of every life recorded in those looping lines. In the glow of the candle, you think back to the first day you donned your brimmed hat and hefted that custom-forged axe. It seemed a straightforward decree, carry out the law. Yet over years of sharpening blades and tallying fines, you've realized your role is woven into a much larger tapestry of power, fear, and spectacle. 3 light jokes flutter at the edges of your mind, one about adding professional headhunter to your resume, another musing that maybe a turtleneck would hide your stains better, and a third about franchising executioners argus. You tuck them away, recognizing that levity is the only shield against despair. Mainstream fact, by the 15th century, most European municipalities formally employed executioners as civic officers, remunerating them via fees for each sentence carried out, and granting them exclusive rights to dispense corporal punishment within city walls. Yet these same governing bodies often treated you as an untouchable enigma, grateful for your services, but loath to grant you full citizenship. You scratch out a payment record, remembering how the town council once debated increasing your fee by a single penny, only to rescind it when public outrage threatened to flay their reputations. You recall the fringe whispers that shadowed your apprenticeship tales, that executioners possessed second sight and uncanny ability to glimpse a person's impending doom in the reflection of their axe blade. You'd catch your breath at every shimmer, half expecting to see the moon's shape warp into skeletal hands. Whether mere superstition or a trick of the low lantern light, those rumors lingered, lending your profession an aura that balanced between necessary order and eerie sorcery. As you lean back, the ledger closed, your gaze drifts to a chipped portrait on the wall, an unknown predecessor, mask-like face obscured by grime eyes that seem to follow your every move. This ghostly ancestor serves as a silent testament that your station transcends individual will. Historians still argue whether executioners were necessary agents of order or mere puppets of tyrants. You tap the studio-polished surface of your axe handle at the portrait, imagining the debates scribbled in musty libraries. Were you upholding justice or enforcing the whims of those in power? You recall a recent scuffle with a magistrate who insisted on relocating the gallows platform closer to the marketplace to improve public morale. When you pointed out the structural dangers, he sneered that safety was secondary to the town's need for spectacle. You couldn't help but retort. Perhaps you'd prefer a live reenactment of gravity versus head, earning a stony silence rather than laughter. Such moments crystallize the tension of your office, both indispensable and disposable. Your mind drifts to the underbelly of power, the hush money you pocketed to discreetly dispatch a noble's rival, the crowd control surcharges you recorded in Section 10, the fines you paid when blood-spatter tarnished civic boots. Each transaction underscored your ambivalent status, revered on execution day, then relegated to the outskirts by dusk. Fringe lore even claimed that some executioners kept a sin ledger alongside their financial one, inscribing the moral weight of each act. You've never dared create such a record, fearing that ink might cut deeper than any axe. You stretch your arms, the candle flame sputtering, as if urging you on. You muse that perhaps your true rite of passage wasn't the first beheading, but the moment you realized the guillotine would never reach these parts, leaving you to shoulder both blade and dignity alone. In that instant, your role transformed from mere mechanics of death into a living symbol of authority and isolation. The line between instrument and individual blurred until you weren't sure where the job ended and you began. A stray breeze drifts through the slit window, carrying the faint aroma of farmland and fermenting grapes from the tavern beyond. You inhale, savoring the normalcy, then exhale, reminding yourself that it's the same breath you draw before every execution, life and death intertwined. You lean forward, scraping charred wax from the desk edge. You think, if someone crafted a statue of me, would they pose me mid-swing or in quiet reflection at this very desk? The question lingers unanswered. 3 light jokes tumble to the surface as the candle dims, one about marketing, death by bureaucracy seminars, another about engraving your epitaph in ledger ink to save parchment, and a final quip pitching the idea of a council of executioners to share best practices. You suppress a grin, knowing that humor is both protest and solace, keeping the edge of madness at bay. A hush falls over the courtyard beyond your window, reminding you of the hush before the block's final delivery. You rise, axe at your side, and step outside. The moon, a silver sickle in the sky, casts long shadows across the cobblestones. You pause at the threshold, feeling the gaze of the unseen audience, the townsfolk who depend on your steady arm, yet never invite you to join their fireside tales. In that liminal space, you embody both the town's wrath and its unspoken fear. You step into the courtyard's chill, letting the night air press against your cheeks. You run a hand along the shaft of your axe, its iron bands warming to your touch. Here, in the interplay of light and shadow, you confront the crux of your vocation. Are you the agent of justice or the instrument of someone else's design? The blade does not answer, but its sharpness reminds you that the world beyond these walls demands clarity in an ambiguous role. As you raise the axe to inspect its edge, the spark of moonlight on steel feels almost like a nod of affirmation. You whisper to yourself, I am both judge and servant, necessary yet reviled. The paradox settles in your bones as firmly as the cold grip of the handle. You replace the weapon on its rack, the metal singing a soft note of assent. Tonight, you choose to own that duality, an executor bound by law, an outsider bound by stigma, and a human bound by conscience. You turn back to the cottage where your sister awaits lessons and your ledger awaits records. Whether you're a pillar of order or a pawn of power may forever remain in scholars' debates. But for now, you stand resolute, knowing that your swing keeps peace, and that peace demands a steady hand. You step into the dawn-lit square, but it's not the familiar platform of old. It's a fenced-off enclosure of iron bars and polished timber where prisoners stand silent in the stocks instead of lying prone on the block. You pause, hand hovering over your axe's haft, as if instinctively seeking its reassuring weight. Around you, the crowd murmurs at a branded man wincing under the hot iron, and you realize the role you knew is vanishing before your eyes. Mainstream fact by the late 17th century, many European states began shifting from spectacle punishments, beheadings, hangings, and the wheel to incarceration, branding, and forced labor in nascent prison systems. Public executions declined as authorities sought more civilized methods of social control. You recall the courtyard gates where Grisby once bleated his warning Section 4. But here there's no room for beasts or blades, only the clank of shackles on worn cobblestones. You wander past a row of prisoners kneeling for whipping, the leather straps cracking like branch whips in autumn. The executioner here wields a scourge instead of an axe, each lash not so much a final mercy as a slow burn. Fringe tidbit, some executioners sold their old block axes to local farmers, advertising them as exjudicial woodcutters, reputed to split oak faster than any peasant's cleaver. You almost chuckle. Imagine marketing your grim tool as a forest-friendly accessory before realizing that even your spare axes are relics on their way to scrap. Historians still argue whether the transition from public executions to hidden punishments stemmed from genuine humanitarian impulse or from rulers' desire to avoid unruly crowds witnessing state-sanctioned killings. You lean against a cold stone wall, one that once reeked of vinegar and echoes Section 2, and watch as guards usher spectators away, confining gazes to sanctioned viewing windows rather than open squares. A man in uniform demonstrates the pillory to a cluster of gawkers locking a thief's head and hands in iron clamps. The thief's muffled groans and the man's triumphant flourish feel oddly theatrical, yet antiseptic compared to your code of the axe days. You run your thumb along your own axe's spine, remembering how its gilded edge once gleamed under lantern light. Section 3. Now that edge feels outmoded, like the clack of a carriage replaced by rumble of railway wheels in another century. A stray breeze flitters through the enclosure, carrying the faint aroma of rosemary from a nearby herbalist's stall. You inhale, thinking of the rosemary-infused oil you once slathered on the block rails to mask blood scent. Section 11. That practice, too, has dwindled. Officials prefer paint coats and quick surface washes to folkloric remedies. You let the modern method feel strangely efficient, if a bit soulless. Out beyond the stocks, you spot a small booth labeled Mock Guillotine Experience, where patrons pay a penny to swing a wooden blade into a dummy's neck. You shake your head, half in amusement, half in sorrow. The executioner's craft has been whittled down to carnival sideshows. Fringe rumor claims the last practicing executioner hosted axe throw competitions at fairgrounds, his old sheep shearing technique transferred seamlessly to tossing sharpened wedges at wooden targets. You consider signing up for nostalgia's sake, but can't decide if it would feel like betrayal or tribute. You wander past cells where prisoners mill about their confinement, replacing your block's finality. Historians still argue whether prisons served more as warehouses for the indigent and mentally ill than as genuine reformatories. You peer through one barred window at a gaunt man who meets your gaze with hollow eyes. No crow whistles from rafters here, no goat bleats counsel. Just a man behind steel and mortar punishment, privatized and removed from public consciousness. As you trace the path back toward the open square, you notice the old executioner's hut, your former workshop being repurposed as a municipal clerk's office. The door remains the same gnarled oak scarred by axe marks, but inside the tools have vanished. In their place, quills, ledgers, and ink pots. Your heart twinges seeing your lonely bench swapped for a dust-lined desk. You heft your axe one last time, feeling its heft as both burden and badge. In a whisper, you joke, "Guess I'll need a desk job now," half expecting someone to laugh. But there's no one, just the hum of foot traffic on newly cobbled pathways. 3 light jokes bubble in your mind about applying for the town clerk's position, about designing a branded hat for pillory operators, and about offering executive exit strategies in corporate training. You smother them, wary of sounding too eager for a career pivot. You slip away from the fading public punishments and into a quiet lane that leads to the old smithy, your erstwhile friend in forging blades. The forge's flicker greets you like an old comrade, though flames now dance more often under horseshoes than axe heads. You step inside, nose prickle at the tang of burning coal. The smith nods, eyes betraying empathy. "Heard your day's work moved indoors," he says softly. You clutch your fox-tooth talisman and reply, "Seems execution went private." He offers you a half-smoked pipe and a nod of solidarity, and you exhale smoke that spirals like fleeting ghosts. You puff thoughtfully. I might sell this axe as antique decor, you muse. He laughs, handing you a flask of ale. And I'd buy it for nostalgia's sake. You clink flasks, honoring the end of an era. As twilight settles, you walk the path home beneath lamplit streets instead of moon-washed courtyards. The lampposts cast small circles of comfort in the gathering gloom, far from the vast shadows that once loomed over your block. You wonder how many towns will maintain their executioner even as the last public spectacle closes. Fringe chatter suggests some kept executioners on payroll as curiosity monitors tasked with attending private drop gallows in noble estates. You imagine a world where executioners become event staff for clandestine duels and whispered verdicts, your craft surviving in society's margins. You arrive at your cottage doorstep, its silhouette unchanged hearth smoke curling into the night air. Grisby's bellows greet you as you push inside. The old goat bleats his usual query dinner. You pat his head in reply. Evening's been a private affair. You hang your axe in the corner, its blade still sharp enough, but belonging to a fading chapter in your life. Inside, your family gathers around the hearth, your sister sketching daisies on new parchment, your brother practicing letters you taught him, Section 7, and your spouse ladling stew from the pot. They look up as you enter, and you settle on your stool, feeling the comforting weight of belonging. Despite your shifting role, you crack your final light joke. Guess I'll have to teach you all the art of whipping. Next, just kidding. Laughter ripples around the room, warming you more than any forge flame or public cheer. You draw a deep breath, closing your eyes to savor the moment. The axe may slip from public view stocks, may replace blocks, and private hells may supplant carnival screams, but here, in this small circle, your purpose endures. You are still the keeper of order, the holder of solemn duty, even as history's page turns. Historians still argue whether the twilight of the axe heralded progress or merely masked new forms of cruelty. You, however, will navigate whatever comes next with steady, hand-wry humor and a whisper to the past that you once carried the blade of justice under open skies. You sink onto the edge of your narrow pallet as twilight drapes the courtyard in indigo shadows, every creak of your bones a reminder of the day's burdens. Finally released, the straw mattress sighs beneath you, and you press your palm against the rough-hewn beam of the pallet's frame, feeling its grain like an old friend's weathered hand. Here at last, you find a rare moment of peace, a fragile pause between the echo of the block and the breath of the night. In the dim glow of a single lantern, you glimpse Grisby curled at your feet, eyes half closed, bleating softly in contentment. That one-eyed goat has been your companion through every grim dawn and harrowing dusk, proof that even those who carry death can still cradle life's quiet joys. You reach down to scratch his scruffy coat, recalling how he once warned you of a lurking guard, Section 4, and how, in turn, you've learned to trust his simple wisdom above any oath sworn by scribes. Mainstream fact. In many medieval towns, executioners concluded their days with a brief prayer at the local chapel. Though barred from the pews, they often slipped inside at dusk for absolution, kneeling in the cool stone vestibule before rotating lanterns dimmed. You bow your head and murmur your own utilitarian prayer, gratitude for survival, hope for tomorrow's steadiness, and a faint plea that your hands remain true. Three light jokes drift through your mind. One imagining the parish clerk granting you a Most Improved Morale Maintenance Award. Another picturing your name engraved on a tombstone reading, "Here lies the town's best blood manager." And a third about offering a motivational speech to the gallows to lift their spirits. After the prayer, you lean back and watch the lantern's flame quiver, its light pooling on smudged runes, faintly etched into the wall, a callback to the hidden shrine under the gallows. Section 6. Those runes marked a place where superstition met grim practicality, much like your own blend of blade and ritual. Fringe whispers some executioners penned secret marginalia in church missals, ridiculous doodles of dancing skeletons, betting that unnoticed by clergy, these illustrations channeled their dark humor into the margins of piety. You smile at the thought, imagining your own skeletal jester leaping across a polished vellum page. The night air seeps through the narrow window, carrying distant strains of a lute from the tavern beyond the walls, an echo of camaraderie found in Section 9's warm alehouse nights. You inhale the melody like medicine, and for a moment you feel transported from your cottage's drafty room to a world where laughter outweighs lament. You lean a shoulder against the wall, close your eyes, and let the music settle deep in your chest, mingling with the gentle bleating at your feet. You glance at the faded sketch of daisies pinned above your pallet, your sister's secret crest from Section 7, a simple symbol of hope, of blossoming amid sorrow. You trace each petal with a fingertip, mindful that life persists in unlikely places. The daisies remind you that beyond the blade's arc lies a world of tender growth, where lessons learned at home seed courage for tomorrow's trials. Historians still argue whether executioners ever truly found solace after their duties or remained haunted by specters of every life taken. You felt the tremor in your dreams. Section 8, the call of whispered dirges at midnight, and yet here you claim this fleeting calm as yours alone. You settle into that calm feeling, the tension drained from your shoulders like ink washed from stone. Your clothes, once stiff with brine and blood, hang draped over a peg, washed thrice today in salt spring and consecrated water. Section 6. The damp fabric radiates cool comfort, a tangible reminder that cleansing rituals cleanse more than cloth. They scrub at your soul's darker corners. You wrap the shawl of your cloak around yourself, its fibers still carrying the faint tang of vinegar and rosemary, and sigh as the world narrows to the small circle of light around you. Across the room, your ledger rests, unopened, its flock of entries paused until dawn. Tonight, numbers hold no sway over you, only the steady breathing of Grisby, the flutter of moths against the lantern glass, and the quiet thump of your own heartbeat. You tuck your fox-tooth talisman into your palm, feeling its cool smoothness cradle your fears. It's been your talisman since Section 3's tool chamber, and tonight it serves as a silent promise that you can face another sunrise. You close your eyes. Every sound magnified: the drip of water in the courtyard gutter, the rustle of straw under Grisby's hooves, the muted chorus of distant night watch. You settle into a measured breath, inhaling shadows and sighing out the day's turbulence. 3 light jokes remain in reserve: one about pinning your memoirs under the title "Swing Low, Sweet Irony." Another about marketing plush Grisby toys to executioner families. And a final quip envisioning your own wax figure at the town museum, complete with interactive acts. But you tuck those jests away, depositing them in your mind's secure vault for another dawn. Here in the hush, you feel both the weight of your calling and the soft cushion of this moment's peace. The curtain of night falls heavy beyond the window, but inside your cottage the lamp glows warmly, warding off the dark. You stretch under your shawl, eyelids growing heavy, each breath a gentle wave lapping at the shores of sleep. As you surrender to that final fold of weariness, you whisper a promise to yourself: tomorrow you will rise again, steady axe in hand, ledger at your side, and enough humor tucked in your pocket to press a smile onto the village square. But for now, you rest, cradled in the delicate balance of duty and respite, knowing that this silent good night is the prelude to another day under the blade's shadow. Word count for 1 Otosu 16. Slow the pace, soften the words, lengthen each sentence, and guide the listener gently into the hush of night. In the gentle glow of your lamp, every shadow seems to breathe slowly, as if the world itself were exhaling after a long day's toil. The air carries the faint scent of straw and lavender, mingling into a lullaby that hums between the walls. You may feel the soft thud of your heart, a quiet drum guiding you toward rest, each beat a reminder that you are alive and here in this moment of calm. Let your limbs become heavier, sinking into the mattress as the blanket's embrace warms your skin like a whispered promise of safety. Allow your thoughts to drift like motes in the lantern light, settling on simple comfort, the steady breathing of a loyal goat at your feet, the distant coo of night birds returning to hidden nests, and the memory of daisies drawn in chalk by your sister's small hand. These gentle images weave a tapestry of warmth around your mind, brush strokes of reassurance in the colors of home. As each second unfolds in soft, expansive silence, feel the tension melt from your shoulders in slow rivulets pooling beneath you until only peace remains. The world outside may carry shadows and obligations, but within these walls you are sheltered. With every considerate inhale, draw in calm. With every mindful exhale, release the day's burdens into the night's vast cradle. And now, as eyelids flutter like sleepy petals, let your final thought be the simplest of all: you are safe. You are released from the blade's burden for a little while, and tomorrow's light can wait. Good night.